Hey, friends, welcome to The Right Side Up with Danielle Strickland and James Scholl, usually. This season is an eclectic mix of fascinating topics with incredible people that I've had the privilege to meet and to talk through, most of them to read their books, to be amazed by some of the things that are happening. I'm calling this the wild card season. Wild card, because you never know from episode to episode what you're going to get and what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be fun. I promise you that. You know, I spent a whole lifetime being told to either slow down or to stick to one thing. But I have always been an eclectic, wild, curious, wide-ranged person. And I love it. I love it. And I think God likes it too. And I hope you enjoy these eclectic conversations with amazing people about some really important topics. It's a wide range. It's a wild card. Get ready to enjoy. Welcome. Okay, Julie Faith Parker is with us on Right Side Up podcast. And Julie, would you mind just taking a couple minutes to introduce us? Who is Julie Faith Parker?
Big question. Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm a Bible scholar. I have a PhD in Old Testament, and that is why I wrote this book called Eve Isn't Evil. I'm also a minister ordained in United Methodist Church. I was ordained when I was 26 years old. And I'm also a mom of two grown kids, and I'm married to a man who is also a minister.
Wow. So that's a lot. So you've got a lot of, I would say that there's different kinds of knowledge. And so you've got this kind of academic, intellectual, robust education. And then you've got this like practice or practical knowledge of lived out experience and, encounters in real life. And I think that's like a 1-2 punch that is very powerful.
Thanks. I feel like it's so important to take this knowledge. Yes, I spent a lot of time in school. I feel like it's so important to take this knowledge and use it. Like, so what? I mean, we know all these things, but what good does it do? What difference can it make in real people's lives? And that's what I seek to be about.
Now, you made a move from a congregational, so like a local context, and you made a move in your own ministry and life. Can you tell me a little bit about that move and what you might advise women who might be in similar spaces?
Sure. So I was ordained, as I mentioned, when I was 26, when I was relatively young, in the United Methodist Church. And at first, I worked in a congregational setting as a pastor. Unfortunately, it was a kind of a challenging experience, honestly. And I left congregational ministry after only serving for 2 years. I'm still a big fan of congregations. I'm very active in my church. I'm the wife of a minister, daughter of a minister, sister of a minister myself, big church fan, but no longer a congregational minister. And I so appreciate your work, Danielle, seeking to empower women, in particular women in ministry, because I think that might have really helped me. But instead, I was then a campus chaplain for 8 years, which I really loved at Hofstra University. And then I had a dream on June 2nd, 1996, in which I believe God called me to teach the Bible. And so I started studying it.
Wow. And tell me just a little bit about that.
Sure. So back in the 90s, I was a mom of two very small children, and I used to watch Melrose Place. Do you remember that show?
Yeah,
An
I sure do.
indefensibly vacuous show.
Yep.
And I loved it. It was my little hour of escape every week. And I always remembered my dreams. And in my dreams, I often have celebrities that like to make cameo appearances. Of course, it's my dream.
Awesome.
And it's really fun. And they all have one thing in common, which is naturally, they find me fascinating. So I'm talking in my dream with Marcia Cross, who played Dr. Kimberly Shaw, and I'm telling her about women in the Bible. And she, of course, was riveted by my conversation, hanging on my every word. I woke up in the morning and I told this dream to my husband, Bill, and he said, "You know, Jewel, that's one of your best subjects." And there was this huge epiphany for me that I needed to teach about women in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know an aleph from a bet, but I felt called to teach the Hebrew Bible. And so long story short, I started studying biblical Hebrew and a whole bunch of other languages and subjects. And 13 years later, I got my PhD.
Wow. And then, okay, tell me about this Eve Isn't Evil. What a great title, by the way, because I feel like you've just like, even just in the title, you've kind of hit the bullseye of a kind of a myth that has been hyper theologized as a belief system that pits women as the bad guy in the entire unfolding story of the scripture. So tell me a little bit about, like, okay, that title hits the bullseye. Tell me a little bit about that experience and that understanding, and then how what you've learned has shifted that.
There is you are so right, Danielle. There's so much I could say about Eve and what people think about her, and it honestly, it really frustrates me, upsets me, gets a little bit angry, and that's my response to this book, because what people say about Eve really is not in the Bible. It's all in the interpretation. And women have been told, Eve, your foremother, is the source of all evil in the world. And I don't know. I look at the story of Cain and Abel in chapter 4, where Cain, oh yeah, murders his brother. Like, if I were going to look at a story that points to evil in the beginning of the Bible, I'd go there. Just saying. But Eve really, as I see her, as the giver of knowledge, as somebody who is bestowing to creation ethics, difference between good and evil. And also Adam eats of the fruit as well. So I just wanted to take this knowledge that I have and really do a close look at the Hebrew and say, wait a second, these things that we're hearing about Eve honestly aren't in the text. It's just the interpretation that has been handed down to us for millennia.
What are the biggest, I mean, that itself is mind blowing, but what are the biggest mind blowing, like, truths that you've discovered in a deep study of the scriptures versus what you had been told in your own, upbringing as a Christian?
Well, one thing that was really stunning to me, in terms of mind-blowing, was in the translation of Genesis 3:6. So Genesis 3:6 reads in the New Revised Standard Version, and when she saw that the tree was good for food, and it was a delight to the eyes, she took and was desired to make one wise. She took of its fruit and she ate, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Those words, who was with her, are in the Hebrew, and English Bibles take them out. What? 1/3 of our English Bibles do not include that Adam was with her, even though the Hebrew word imach is undisputed in the Hebrew text, and not only the Hebrew, but also the Aramaic, also the Greek. Jerome, who's a translator from the 4th to 5th century CE, he takes it out of the Latin. And so a lot of translations follow the Latin, because a lot more people knew Latin than knew Hebrew when they were translating going forward. And so that is missing in a lot of our Bibles. And that just changes the story. I'm like, how do they get away with this? Taking out words that are in the Bible to enforce this translation that you can only blame Eve for what's going on. Whereas Adam in Genesis 2:16 and 17, he is there. He is there when God gives the command, don't eat of the fruit of this tree. And Eve hasn't even been created yet, but she is the one who gets blamed for it. The fall, a term that is nowhere in that story, nowhere in Genesis 3. So we got a lot of work to do.
What are your thoughts of JL?
JL.
The
Yael. Sorry, Yael.
Yeah.
You're talking. Oh, sorry. Yes, I thought this was some book I didn't know. JL.
Sorry,
No,
L.
no.
Yeah.
Yael. That is an incredible story. So we're in Judges 4-5 now, and we read about her power, also her violence. She really, I think it shows us that a lot of our stereotypes that we hold about women in the Bible just really aren't there. And certainly we have a lot of portraits that counter it. Because for people who might not be familiar with that story, she takes this man in Judges 4 and 5. First, the prose version is in chapter 4, and then the poetic version is in chapter 5. This man runs to her, and she says that she is going to hide him, and he feels that he is safe with her, but instead she takes a tent peg and she drives it through his skull to save the Israelites. And she's strong, she's violent, but she is definitely a hero in the way that we don't often think of heroes in the Bible, or women as heroes in the Bible, or in life even.
Yeah. It's one of those passages that always amazes me, because it's not just one female hero, it's two.
That's right.
Right. And then also the heroine is not the one you think it's going to be, because it should be Deborah, but then it's not Deborah, it's JL. And then there's something about the crushing of the enemy enemy's head that's kind of prevalent in some prophetic passages in the scripture, of the eventual crushing of Satan's head by the body of Christ.
Oh,
So
that's so interesting.
so
That's
I'm
so
always like,
interesting.
what's going on? Like, so this actually leads us to, what are your tips for people to really fully maybe understand the Bible in a fresh way, or some scripture texts where we've all been told like women are either the damsel in distress that need to be rescued by a man, or they're the villain, who
Right.
are, the source of evil in the world and we should fear them. What are your best tips to reapproaching the scriptures through a more truthful lens?
Well, you hit on something so important, Danielle, and that is where patriarchy likes to place women, which is the pedestal or the pit, right? And
Mm.
just as you were saying, the damsel in distress, or this, they're just, you've either got to be rescued, or you're perfect, perfect, perfect in every way. And that's why I think the two most famous women in the Bible are Eve and Mary, because there you've got the pedestal and you've got the pit. Even though
Mm.
Eve only appears in Genesis chapter 3, she's like nowhere else in the Bible, but she's so famous in our culture because what we've been told about her. But some tips would be: one, really try to avoid the pitfall, pun intended, of the pedestal or the pit. And Yael is a great example of that, right? When we look at the different dimensions to women characters in the text. Also, I think it's really important to remember that the power is not in the text, the power is in the interpretation. And along with that, there is no one right way to interpret the Bible. And if someone tells you there's one right way, chances are excellent it's going to be what they think. What a coincidence. But there are lots of ways we can interpret the text. And I think we know that because we keep coming back to the text and we get different interpretations at different points in our own lives just because of how we've changed. Even with ourselves, we realize it. But so there's no one right way, and the power is in the interpretation. There's no one right way to interpret the text, but there is a wrong way. And that is any way that is harmful to someone, including yourself. And so if someone tells me, for example, as a woman, that I should not teach or preach, and they cite First Timothy 2:12, I permit no woman to have authority over a man, she is to keep silent. I say, sorry, I reject that interpretation. there are lots of places where no one takes the Bible literally. No, I mean, you can't. And people say, I take the Bible. That's another thing to keep in mind, another tip. No one takes the Bible literally. If someone says, I take the Bible literally, my quick response is to cite Mark 10:31. Jesus says, sell everything you have and give the money to the poor. And I notice you're still wearing clothes. you know?
Yeah. And it would appear to me that most people that say that take the Bible literally when it doesn't apply to them.
Right. That's right.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So, but even in that same passage, there are instructions Paul's giving in Timothy that people aren't practicing to this day. So
So
even
true.
if you were to just say, take the same passage and read it all, and are you living, nobody is, because you're contextualizing and applying, and then you're interpreting what this means for today. And you're doing all that except in this one instance when it's about you.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly,
Right.
exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's another key tip, another really important point, is that the Bible is descriptive of people at a time and a place very different from ours. Long time ago, very different culture. So it's descriptive of them, these writers, trying to understand the relationship with God. It is not prescriptive as to how we should act today in the 21st century. So it's
Mm.
describing another time, another place, another people, another culture, and how they're grappling with their relationship with God. But it's not prescriptive of everything that we should do today.
That's a very helpful descriptive over prescriptive. Um, yeah, that's wonderful. And so then the real trick is to find the principles that are at work in that, so that you can extrapolate, what does that mean for us today?
Exactly.
Mm,
Exactly. And
wow.
for me as a Christian, I seek to look to the life of Jesus and how he acted with compassion towards people. Yet at
Mhm.
the same time, we need to remind ourselves that Jesus was a good Jew. He is just living out his Jewish faith in everything he does. When he cites when he says, cites what we call the golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself. That's Leviticus 19:18, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
just being a good Jew. When he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, Deuteronomy 6:5, he's just being a good Jew. So I look to Jesus in his Judaism, and those are the guiding principles for me.
Mm, that's cool. Who are your favorites? If you had to choose your favorite female characters in the Bible, who are they and why?
Oh, that is such a wonderful question. I think, right away, my mind goes to the woman of Endor. So that's in 1 Samuel 28. And she is this woman with great spiritual gifts. And King Saul, and so she's a medium, and she can call up people who have been dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so King Saul comes to her because he's about to go into battle with the Philistines. And he's worried about it, understandably, because they were really fierce warriors. And he goes to her because he wants advice from Samuel, who has died, who is the prophet and the priest who has died. And at first she refuses because mediums have been forbidden, but he implores her and she relents, not knowing who he is. And then she calls up Samuel. She realizes who he is. And she gives the prediction that Samuel says to Saul, you and your sons will be like me tomorrow. You're going to be dead like me tomorrow. And indeed, that's what happens. They lose in a battle with the Philistines. But before that, he collapses on the ground. And what does she do? She cooks for him. She says, let me get a fatted calf. Where else do we see that with Jesus, right? Let me get a fatted calf. And she kills it and she cooks it. And she basically gives him his last meal. And she implores him to accept this from her. And then he goes to battle the next day, and indeed he dies. But I just love that for two reasons. One, it shows her spiritual gifts. It shows that she is that she has these. She's a prophet. There are different kinds of prophets. Being a medium is one type of prophet. Women are called
So
prophets.
so that's interesting, because that would literally, people would be like, what? That's demonic.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And people would say, like, she's a sorceress, like all these sort of things. And would you think that the reason we think that is because of that? She's a pitfall, or like we don't have, or because of the way we've interpreted or translated the word medium in the past?
It's yes, I think you're right. I think it's this putting these women in different places, the pedestal or the pit. She isn't, so most people know this. If they know this story, they know her as the witch of Endor. She is never called a witch in the text. There is a word for that in the Hebrew Bible, but it's not in this passage. She is never called that. She is a Be'alat, if I'm remembering the Hebrew correctly off the top of my head. But it's like she has this power to communicate. And I think a lot
But
of us have,
it's not spoken of as negatively in the text,
not at all.
which
Not
is
at all.
why it freaks us out, because it's always raised so many questions for me about, like, why would Saul consult a demonic sort, like, because we think of
Right.
like a medium now, and it's literally someone reading tarot cards, and is that what it is?
I mean, she is communicating with the divine. That's what a
Right.
prophet is. A prophet is an intermediary, somebody
Right.
who has this extra access to the
Right.
divine realm. And there are prophets all around us today. It's a cross-cultural anthropological phenomenon. It's not just something limited to those 15 books called the prophets in the Bible at
Right.
all.
Right.
And so, but we think of her as a witch because if you read your English Bibles, it will say about that story, the witch of Endor, not in the text, nowhere in the
Wow.
text. And so that helps us to have this negative view of her when she is courageous, she is spiritually gifted,
So
she is
she would be the
compassionate, she
prophet
is
of
generous.
Andor. She
She
would
is
be the
the
prophet of Andor.
she is a prophet. She absolutely behaves as a prophet does, but she is not called a prophet in the text. So the word for prophet is navi, like in
Yeah.
those Avatar movies, right?
Yeah.
The word for prophet in Hebrew is navi, and the feminine form is neviah.
Uh-huh.
And there are 5 women in the Hebrew Bible who are called neviah. That's Miriam in canonical order. That's Miriam, Deborah, Huldah, the prophet in Isaiah, in first Isaiah, female prophet, maybe Isaiah's wife, and Noadiah in Nehemiah. Those 5 women have the word neviah, prophet, associated with them. But there are other women who act in prophetic ways,
Mhm.
and they don't have that word associated with them.
Yeah.
Just like there are men too who act in
Yeah.
prophetic ways, don't have the word associated with them. And the woman of Endor is one of them.
Wow. That is mind blowing.
I know, right? It's so exciting. And that's why I love reading the text in Hebrew. I mean, really blows my mind all the time. I get so you can hear it in my voice. I get so
Yeah.
excited about it. It's just I never saw this. And so that's why all your listeners should learn Hebrew, Danielle.
Yes. Well, that's my next question is like, okay, so I think we know enough in this season to know that the way that things have been translated and interpreted have been through patriarchal lenses. So you kind of have these, you have my response to that is like, and I don't really
Yes.
know what to do then, because do I just throw everything out that I've learned about the Bible? Do I start again? Where do I go? How do I get to a cleansed, a cleansed view of the scriptures? What are your best tips instead of just abandoning? I know a lot of women have just abandoned it because they're
I
just like, you
know.
know what? This has been used as a tool of oppression. I've been hurt by this. I've been at the receiving end of this. And of course, in our work, Women Speaker Collective is just one of them, where the vast majority, 80% of the women that come to a speaking, communication elective class would have been told literally out loud that they're not allowed to speak at church. So you can sort of go, this is not one or two women that are experiencing harm from terrible interpretations of scripture. This is general Western minded, strong, capable women being told on a regular basis they shouldn't speak. And that to think that they're called to it even is like some kind of ungodly, unholy aim. So we do a lot of work sort of combating them. But I find that the problem, is deeper than just how you feel it's what do you do now with the Bible, which you actually feel called to preach. So like I feel called to like the sacred texts of the scriptures are life-giving and inspiring. And like, they're the foundation of much of my faith. So what do I do? How to rescue me from this patriarchal, theological, interpretive oppression that's been at work in our world?
Think it's a huge question and such an important question. I think there are a number of ways to go at it. I think one thing that's really key is to find a supportive community.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think you do so much to create that, Danielle,
Mm-hmm.
to give women a place to say, this is a safe space to share your ideas and talk honestly about the text. I think that's really important because if you feel like you're one lone voice and you're it's you versus the patriarchal world of Christian interpretation. That's really tough. But if you find a supportive community, I think that's really important. Some conversation partners. That's one thing. I would urge people, men, women, anybody, non-binary folks, anybody who has felt that the Bible has been harmful to them, and it's not the Bible, it's the interpreters of the Bible. But I feel like to give over that power is really a shame. To say, okay, well, I'm just forget the Bible. It's useless to me. It's been too, or it's worse. It's been an instrument of harm, so I'm abandoning it. Then you're giving over all that power of
Mm-hmm.
sacred text to people who want to use it against you. But
Mm-hmm.
there are other ways. So you find that supportive community where you can voice your ideas safely and feel encouraged in growing into the fullness of yourself, of your smart thinking, speaking, articulating, called self. I think that's really important. I think another thing is to really educate yourself with resources that can be helpful. Again, you supply so many of these, and in my own small way, I seek to do that with this book. I've got a section in here, an appendix called Bible Basics, in which I answer who, what, where, when, why, and how the Bible was written, all about those basics. And then I go through every single book in one line. I summarize it. So you can get some basic Bible knowledge so you're equipped with that. And then I think to find resources, and there are lots of them. I hope I've written this book to be one, but there are others as well, in which women, people who feel like they've been abused by the text can find communities, not only in person and not only through podcasts, but in addition through books, through resources, where stories of women are lifted up, where different kinds of people, non-binary people as well, are lifted up and said, yes, there's a place for you in this text, and it's a life-giving place.
That is so cool.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. And thanks for being open to discover and be curious and to learn from voices that maybe you don't normally hear and topics that you really didn't sign up for in the season. But I think this crazy wild ride of discovery is a way of learning and growing. and becoming even better humans together, whether we agree or not. So thanks for being on the ride. As a thank you, I wanted to offer you a code that you can enter at the Deep and Wide Academy. So that's at deepwideacademy.com, deepwideacademy.com. The code is right side up. That's the name of this podcast. So just right side up at the deepwideacademy.com, and it will get you 20% off on all of or any of the courses offered there. Those courses are intended to be deep and wide, experiential wisdom shared in order to pass it on, not just knowledge, but wisdom, which is applied knowledge and practice knowledge and embodied knowledge. So if this is something that might interest you, which I hope it is, and you either want to check it out and learn, or you want to be a collaborator, and you can contact us in that regard. But anyway, check it out. Code right side up. It'll get you 20% off. And deepwideacademy.com is available for you. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the rest of this episode. That's great. That's so helpful. And more, I almost feel like, do you remember in the medical community, it's like women's health was not a thing until women became doctors. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, like there's a whole thing here that we never even bothered to know about or learn about or explore more. And I think there's still a lot of places to go there, but it feels like the same is true in this era of Christendom. Is it's until women, became scholars. And I think this is what's really interesting about your trajectory, where you're like, you know what? I think I got to go figure this out. Like, I think I got to go on a deep dive and become an expert in the reading of the sacred scriptures and then interpreting them, because there's a whole world here we didn't even know was a thing.
That is so true. I feel, and it was really a woman, Dr. Phyllis Tribble, who was my professor in seminary, and she really started feminist interpretation of the Hebrew Bible. And that's just what opened my mind incredibly. And I thought, wow, these scriptures have something to say to me. I'd never felt that way before. And it was so exciting. And then as I look at the Hebrew text and I look at the English translation, like just these few examples I've given to you, but with Eve 3, about Genesis 3:6 with Eve, about the woman of Endor, 1 Samuel 28, I'm like, wait a minute. What is going on here? Not so fast, boys. You can't get away with it anymore. And even if you look at the lexica, so a lexicon is a dictionary for a set corpus. And so if you look at the lexicon for the Hebrew English lexicon for the Old Testament, or the Greek English lexicon for the New Testament, even the dictionaries aren't neutral. It's stunning to me. Like the same verb, aman, is used to describe Mordecai, it says he raised Esther, he raised Hadassah, but the same verb that's used for Naomi is she nursed her. It's like, what? If for men, it's really interesting to me, even in these dictionaries and these lexicon, how the definitions change. So we really need to keep questioning, and you need the tools to do that.
That's really great. I remember years ago, I was teaching a lot around ending trafficking, human trafficking, and coming across the biblical text where literally slave masters are condemned by Paul. It literally is translated slave masters, but because the translators were translating for King James, they were like, we can't say that. And so they used a similar word, but they used the word kidnapper. So it's a really weird thing. And actually, technically, it's kind of true. Slave masters are kidnapping in a way, but it literally, and I thought, think of the difference in the way we would even have viewed slavery from the start if the English translators and interpreters of the scriptures would have been faithful to the text over their fear of culture and dominant male oppressive men. So even that, I just was like, this is incredible. Like, so for years, literally like a foundation of a nation was founded on the idea that like slave masters aren't actually condemned in the scriptures when they really literally by name are,
It's so true. But, I think they would have had slavery anyway. It just would have been more ammunition for people fighting it.
Right. That's right. Because people believe
the economics are too huge.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So those are great next steps, like really good beginnings. Where can people track with you, Julie, if they're looking for, I know this book Eve is not evil. We want everyone to get it. Where do they get it? And then is there a way to track with you a little bit more intentionally?
Thanks so much for asking. Sure. Eve Isn't Evil, Feminist Readings of the Bible to Upend Our Assumptions. That's the book, and it's readily available, Amazon or Barnes & Noble or all sorts of, all distributors have it, or major distributors. I also teach at Marble Collegiate Church, which is located in New York City, where I live. And I'm their biblical scholar in residence. And all of their programs are available free online. And so all the classes that I've taught, I did one called not long ago, in September, not long ago, I did one called the Earth Mother, the Mother of All Living and the Earth Creature, Eve and Adam Revisited. I did one just 2 weeks ago called Cain and Abel, Sibling Rivalry Turned Deadly. I'm doing another one this week, Noah's Ark, Children's Story or Horror Story. So those, if anyone would like to take classes with me, you're welcome to do it. They're live streamed and they're free, and they are also cataloged online. I also have a website, juliefaithparker.com, and I'm always glad to interact with folks.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about this book. I'm excited about people reading the book. And what I would hope, I mean, this is my prayer all the time from Ephesians, sort of, is that the eyes of our heart would be enlightened so that we could fully understand just the measure of God's, boundless love and how deep it can go and how wide it can go and how liberating it is and how inclusive it is. And just praying that these tools might help people. And I love that subtitle, that questioning our assumptions. Would that be not a threat, but a great invitation?
This is why God made us as thinking, questioning people. And I think that the scriptures, for me, the scriptures are part of God's boundless love. Because what distinguishes this God, the God whom we meet in the Bible, what distinguishes this God from other gods, which there were lots of gods and goddesses, not only in the ancient Near East, but also in the Bible. There are goddesses in the Bible. There are goddesses who are mentioned by name in the Bible. And I talk about that in one of the chapters, sex workers, slaughters, and deities without borders. But what distinguishes this God of the Hebrew Bible, who has the proper name Yahweh, from other gods of the ancient Near East, is this God wanted to be in relationship with people. Mm-hmm. And this God heard their cries and was a God of liberation and sought to deliver them, and then sought to deliver them again, coming down to earth through Jesus Christ. And so this boundless love that you're talking about, Danielle, that is exactly what I read throughout the scriptures, because people are grappling with their relationship with this God who loves them and seeking to understand it. And I think when we grapple with scriptures, that's what we're trying to do too.
Wonderful. So great. Love it. Okay, guys, Eve isn't evil. Note to self. And maybe, just maybe, that means you aren't either. And you should get this book and start questioning all of the assumptions and see where it might lead us, which I have a hunch is going to lead us to some pretty beautiful places together. So thank you, Julie, for being part of this podcast.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Really a pleasure. So wonderful talking with you. Thank you.